Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be on today's episode. It's episode number 33, and I have a really, really special guest that I've been wanting to speak to and talk to for a long time. Many of you might actually know of her already. She does relationship anxiety work, and her and I actually spoke for the first time last month, and we just had such a good conversation. And I just really wanted to get her on today's podcast episode. So, Sarah Yudkin, welcome. We're so excited to have you to the Wicked into Love podcast.
Thank you so much. I've been excited about this.
I'm so happy that you're here. So, you're living in Sweden. I know you and I talked a little bit, and you have been doing, how long have you been doing relationship anxiety work for?
So, last year in 2021 was the first full year that I had started working with clients. But before then, it was about a year that I was really deep into the knowledge of what is going on here. How can I learn more about this? So, it's really been in the last few years for me like a whole 180 because my life completely shifted. I was living in Virginia, had a corporate job, and now I'm living in Sweden and I'm getting to help people with something that I went through, and it just feels so much more rewarding.
So, how did you start your journey with everything on? Because I know your main platform is on Instagram, right? I think a lot of people follow you. Do you have a TikTok too, or you're mainly on Instagram? Both.
I do.
And
Yeah.
and so I know you post on Instagram. How did you kind of start your journey? Was it a thing where you were starting to just talk about relationship anxiety because you experienced it, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can really help these people? Like, how did you start this?
Yeah. So, well, before I had any ideas of helping people, I needed help myself. And, I think many of us can relate to that. And I was having a very hard time with my relationship anxiety. And then it kind of came to a peak during the beginning of the pandemic because Nate, my boyfriend, and I were actually long distance. So we had never lived together. And then in the pandemic, we moved in together. And I had been put on furlough from my job and didn't have any work. And so, paired with the stress of everything going on in the world, I had nothing to do except for just be up in my head all day. And it was our first time living together. So being, right around me all the time, I felt like he was kind of my target for some of my intrusive thoughts. So at the time, I kind of had a breaking point, and I just recently wrote about this on my blog actually, where the thoughts became so real. And finally, one day I burst and I was like, I don't know if I love you the same way anymore. I don't know what's going on with me. I hate that I'm feeling this way, but this is what's going on. And he met me with so much compassion and love. And, like many partners tend to do, I was just like, how is he being so nice? It just didn't even make sense to me being in such a bad headspace. So, from that moment when he was just so supportive, like unconditionally supportive, which I know that word can be a little bit of a relationship anxiety trigger when we're like, what does unconditional love mean? But long story short, I realized I had to learn more about what was going on and I had to do something about it. So, funny enough, my story started with a perfectionist belief that if I could just be better at relationships, and I'm doing air quotes for those who are listening to this, but if I could just be better at relationships, then I'll be better and not as anxious. So that kind of led me on a journey to really understand relationship dynamics and how relationships are. And then I decided just to start sharing more about it, not in a way to help others, but just to share my story and see what happened.
It's amazing how we can share something and we might not know at the time how many people resonate with it, where we're just kind of sharing our journey / we're going through it so intimately within ourselves. And then afterwards we're like, oh, a lot of people around me are resonating. And I feel like recently it's been, I don't know if it's more of like a common thing. I think like there's a lot of stuff with social media and comparison and everything really heightening the anxiety, but I'm feeling like a lot more people are starting to become aware of it, versus before. And that can be like a humbling, really interesting experience. But I'm sure you've probably been seeing that within your journey too. Like, wow, there's a lot of people who can resonate with my story or who understand that. I'm sure that's also been somewhat comforting as well in your journey as well.
Yeah. And, it never gets old getting a message. I'm sure you feel the same, being like, wow, I had never thought of things this way. So thank you for just sharing your experience because I resonate with it. And, for me, the decision to actually, move into a coaching space was Nate found out he could go to Sweden and for his job. And at the time, I still wasn't back at my corporate job, and my blog had just started getting somewhat of people, knowing what it was. And people asked, how did you, learn all this stuff? And could you help me with this? And I think it was just serendipitous events that gave me the idea of, if people are asking for help with this and I don't have a job and we're maybe moving to a whole new country, why couldn't this be something that I take a little bit more seriously? So I think it was because people resonated with the message that I even had the idea that I could do anything like this.
It's amazing. It's amazing how it kind of like all starts to then like ripple. Like before, at least for me, I didn't even think that my experience with ROCD and anxiety would make me be at where I am right now, like a couple of years down the line. We started in 2016, 2017, but where we are now and everything like that, it's crazy. But I think that we need this information more than ever. And so I'm really also excited for you, to be doing this work and everything. And so I think that one thing that I really wanted to talk about today, which I think is just such an important topic that I feel like we don't really see, I've never seen really people talk too much about it, is the whole idea of ROCD versus like relationship anxiety. And I know when you're doing your work and you're talking about it, you're speaking in terms of, you're saying relationship anxiety. Would you be able to tell me or tell the audience a little bit in your background as to why the term relationship anxiety resonated with you versus like ROCD? Because there's a lot of people who kind of get confused about that. And that's something I really want to kind of hone in on today.
Yeah, absolutely. And in all honesty, before I had come across the concept of, relationship anxiety or obsessively doubting the relationship, I had never really been exposed to much about OCD. Like I had heard people misusing the term before, saying I'm very OCD, with my cleaning, for example, which I know is a pretty harmful, thing to say to someone who has the OCD diagnosis, or resonates with having OCD. But to me, I mean, my mom has been on anxiety medication before, and so like I knew that anxiety was something that had kind of either genetically been passed on to me or just from just being around her. I think like I resonate with the term anxiety, and I just never really, like I said, been exposed to much about OCD. So it wasn't top of mind, I don't think, for me to resonate with the phrase. And I do think that, there are people that I work with that do resonate much more with the term ROCD because they've experienced other OCD like symptoms or tendencies. And again, I could be misusing some of this language. So I want to acknowledge that. And if someone wants to, point that out to me or correct me, I'm really open to hearing more about that because I'm the first to note that I am not an OCD expert. So that's kind of why I gravitated more towards the phrase relationship anxiety. And I had come across, The Wisdom of Anxiety by Cheryl Paul, and the term in that book was relationship anxiety. So it kind of was something that just clicked with me, and it felt like my experience really to a T. And so once I heard of the term ROCD, I kind of almost, grouped the two as maybe cousins or friends that had very similar tendencies. So that's kind of my experience, but I'd love to hear yours and what led you to gravitate towards ROCD.
Yeah, I think what's something that's so important for and you and I to kind of discuss is that I think that the work that we do is really based around empowering an individual and having them feel empowered versus disempowered. I think when I worked in the mental health field, I started working in the mental health field when I was like 23. I was a social worker and then kind of thrown into like the psych ward, which was just like a whole intense experience where I learned so much about the Western kind of diagnostic psychiatric system. I think that what I saw when I was kind of in that field is a very disempowered model where there's so much of a focus on, and not trying to negate this in any way as it being wrong, but just more of like interesting type of thing where people would go in and they would almost look toward the psychiatrist or the doctor or the therapist as like a savior in a lot of ways, like whatever they said is right, and if a person or client didn't necessarily like agree with that, they would almost like disempower themselves and say, okay, but the doctor says that I'm this, or the doctor says I have this diagnosis, even though it doesn't really resonate with me, but I'm just going to listen to them anyway. And I saw a lot of things that were very harmful for a lot of people who were going in, especially around medication and being so tied to, and I know you and I will talk about this a little bit later, but being so tied to like a diagnosis, like, okay, I am this, this is who I am. Like I finally have an answer, but down the line, it started to almost like cripple them. Like I am this, I can't do X, Y, and Z, you know? And I sometimes see that with people with ROCD, and they kind of get into this state where they're like, well, I have ROCD, I can't do that. Like almost like an excuse in a way to disempower. And I think that you and I really spoke about how we feel very confident in wanting to empower the people that we work with. And that's something that we feel really called to, which is, you know, wanting to empower in person and feeling into, you know, if the ROCD label feels good for you, that's great. If the relationship anxiety label feels good for you, that's great. If both feel great for you, that's great, you know? And I think that that was something that I worked with, where I also kind of tiptoed with both. And I felt what felt good for me. And then I used that to empower me. So that was kind of my take with it, where I use both techniques to really empower me as an individual, and I like to do that with our clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the cool thing about social media, but also the hard thing about it, is that there's so many different people with many different messages about a similar subject. So, I mean, look at the two of us here today. We both are, have similar missions, not the exact same, but we're trying to help people with something that we both experienced, and that ties to, questioning your healthy, loving relationship. But there could be people listening to this that hear one of us and say, oh, I resonate with what she says more, or maybe they see someone else online talking about it. And so whether or not it's a label that you resonate more with, or a person who's sharing a message, I think you can just try to ask yourself, does this make me feel good to hear this? Or does this sound like something that, resonates with me? Because if it doesn't, then maybe I don't need to listen to it. And that doesn't mean just throw out any sort of advice from anyone, but just having an opinion on it first, and maybe taking some time to sit with it. Because I know that I've been very quick to prescribe myself about something based on some random person's Instagram post or something I heard on a podcast even, and I would take it to heart. So just reminding people that they have that sense of autonomy to reflect on something, and see if, and try it on for size almost.
I think it's so hard with anxiety, right? Like with the OCD, it's almost like, oh my God, like that there's this like fixation and need to be like, I am this, because it can be so hard for many individuals who have anxiety to just lie into the gray of trying something on, or like being like, well, I'm just going to give it time and see what feels good to me. There's always that sense of, oh, I definitely have ROCD, I definitely have anxiety, almost like an excuse and a way to say, then I'm in an okay relationship, versus I can play around with the whole dynamic of being in this relationship and play around with different type of help and support. And it doesn't have to define me and who I am and my relationship. And I think that itself can be a healing journey for a lot of people.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to see. I think something that also came up to me too was, um, you know, uh, kind of seeing Alexis. Alexis is the primary therapist for RCD, and working with her with anxiety, and also having seen so many therapists. There were so many therapists that did not diagnose me with RCD, and there were some therapists that did. So, I think that I say that specifically because at the end of the day, it's taking what works for you and trying that on. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there, because I thought that that was, important to say that it's kind of like all like playing with different type of hats type of thing, and then getting the support that you feel drawn to.
Yeah. And I think, like we just said, with the gray areas that are so hard to sit in with the anxious mind, or if you have OCD or OCD tendencies, it's kind of, you can see someone talking about a topic. And if you hadn't been exposed to it before, let's say someone comes across one of our pages for the first time, and they're like, wow, they're explaining everything I've felt. I'm so grateful for this label that finally explains what I've been experiencing. So they feel this sense of, I'm not alone. There's other people like me. And I'm so glad that I don't have to feel this shame anymore, or at least I remember feeling like that. And then, that's a great piece of labeling yourself as something. And then, as you said earlier, when it becomes an excuse, or when you become victim to the circumstances that you're in, and kind of use that label as something that means you can't grow, or can't do certain things, I think that's when it becomes something to look out for. So just showing people those two extremes.
Have you noticed that within yourself at all through your journey with relationship anxiety, where in the beginning it might have been like, oh, I have this term for it and I'm really excited and know what it is? And have you noticed yourself almost like needing to work with letting that label go and how that's been?
Yeah, definitely. I remember just feeling such a weight. And, someone I mentioned, Cheryl Paul's book that I had come across, she's definitely inspired me a lot. And I remember when I read the book, I just ran to Nate and I was like, oh my gosh, like someone mentioned this thing. I thought I was the only one who thought this. And I just remember feeling so like huge relief. It doesn't mean the anxiety was gone forever, but there was a moment of feeling that relief. And then now, a few years later, I feel like there are times where I need to kind of distance myself, even though I am a coach for it, so I can't distance too much. But there's days when I'm like, I notice that I'm really hyper fixating just on relationships because I'm a relationship coach and I help people with relationships. So I will hear a podcast or an Instagram post and I'm like, how can I teach this to my clients, or how can I, integrate this into my own relationship, realizing that, I don't need to be doing it 100% of my life. I can distance even myself from just the sphere of relationships. I don't know if you feel that way, but sometimes it's hard to turn off my coaching brain, even when I'm just trying to have a normal, moment with Nate. I'm trying to think and analyze a little bit too much.
And I think that that's the analyzing, and some people get really caught into that, right? Like where it's almost like they don't realize that the analyzing and the educating can definitely be that perfectionism that's like underneath
Yep.
that. Like if I learn all this type of stuff, then I can have my relationship be perfect. And I think that people swing into that area with like couples work and relationship work. And then also they swing into, if I can make my anxiety perfect or the OCD perfect, then everything will be perfect. And it's really sticky underneath like what's driving that, because I feel as though you also have a passion for understanding relationship work and anxiety work and trying to find that balance, I'm sure, of okay, this is like actual education work to help my clients, and oh, I'm trying to make this in a way to make sure that my relationship is perfect.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. Sometimes I have to like set my own boundaries of, oh, I'm just reading this book for fun. Like I don't need to look for quotes from my Instagram page, and like I don't need to take notes on this. And I think some days I need to remember, oh, I'm probably adding an extra layer of analyzing or noticing this because I'm not only looking from my lens, I'm looking from, oh, how can I help my clients understand this too? So even if me and Nate get into a disagreement, sometimes I have to remember like not every disagreement needs to like be an Instagram post afterwards, but some of them have a valuable lesson and I'm comfortable sharing some things. But I think there's a level of some boundaries you have to have when you're sharing things like this online. And I'm sure you feel the same.
So what would you say to some people who are like, who really love the educational analyzing, intellectual aspect, because the intellectualization can definitely be kind of that compulsive. What would you say, because I'm sure you saw that within yourself, what would you say would be helpful for someone who is like, I love it, but then also like, I think I'm going to be using it compulsively. Like what's been helpful for you?
Yeah. Well, I think for me, noticing what my intention is behind it. Like, am I, to your point, trying to be perfect and fix my relationship from problems by reading this book and thinking that this is like the ticket to making things finally better? Or is it because I'm genuinely curious? Like, can I finish the book in 3 months, or do I need to finish it in 3 days because I'm desperate for the new information? So just remembering the intention behind it. And then if it's someone who feels the compulsion of it, maybe giving yourself some of those boundaries that I said, like maybe for a month, you're not buying a new book and you're just taking some time to implement things or just to practice mindfulness and allowing yourself to have some space without, overstimulation and more information for a little bit.
So there was something that you said that was interesting where you said not using it compulsively. So when you're doing a relationship anxiety work, are you talking to your clients and your students about like compulsive type of work? Because I know that's usually in like the regard of like the ROCD, and I know that it's such a broad topic, but are you using like that term as well with like the ROCD, like a compulsively like going into it? Like, would you say it's like tied? Because I think that that's sometimes can be confusing, right? Where the relationship anxiety work doesn't necessarily have the C sometimes, like the compulsive part.
Totally. It's funny that you even said that because I honestly don't use the word very often. It might have been because we're just having this
In case I
conversation that
say
it just
people
like
would.
came up. Yeah, but I would say, I think that the term obsessive gets used actually out of context too. And the more I've been in this space, like for the limited time, I've tried to be really mindful and I follow certain, accounts that are like, please don't use the word obsessive to just talk about, like, oh, I'm obsessed with this, new outfit, for example, because that can be something that can actually for those who struggle with OCD. So I've tried to actually be really mindful of the terminology I use. I really don't use the word compulsion or compulsive very often, but the sentiment of kind of that desperation and the need to do something as a way to almost avoid sitting in the discomfort, I would say is more of what I kind of was saying with that intended word.
That makes total sense. So what would you do in different situations where someone's coming to you and they're like, I think I have ROCD, I think I have relationship anxiety. Would you go into what we talked a little bit about earlier in terms of like feeling into what feels most empowering for an individual? I'm curious what you would say to individuals who come to you who are like, I'm not sure if I should take the relationship anxiety route or the ROCD route.
Totally. So it's similar to what I tell people who are coming to me who have experienced, I would say, big T trauma, because I'm trauma informed, but I am not a trauma therapist. And that's the same thing I say to someone who's curious about OCD. I say, I know what ROCD is, but I'm not an ROCD or OCD therapist. And so if you're looking for any type of OCD specific treatment in the sense of like exposure therapy or working with someone who is an expert in the OCD tendencies, that isn't going to be myself, but I have that specific focus on relationship anxiety and what some dip into as ROCD. And so if you resonate with a lot of what I share, then that is going to be the experiences that I'm sharing back with you as I help coach you to become more confident and learning how to kind of handle the intrusive thoughts and all of the feelings that arise in your body. So I'm always the first to give kind of that disclaimer to someone that sits down with me, and I say, just like I'm going to lovingly point you in a direction to get more support with trauma if I see that you have certain traumas that I cannot hold space for, then I will do the same if I notice that, for example, maybe you would be best to have an OCD therapist and, a relationship anxiety coach, which some of my clients have had. And I know that is like way not necessarily the norm. And I don't think everyone has the capacity to have both. But if in a perfect world, all of this would just be something that everyone is able to access. And I think that it could be really unique for different people to have, different options of support that they could get at the same time.
I love that. So what I'm hearing is that it can be a blend with both. Like someone could be working with you, but they can also be working with like an OCD specialist, like at the same time. Like and what's so interesting is, and I've talked about this before, when I had ROCD, like I worked with like so many people. Like I work with a therapist, I work with a mindfulness coach, I work with like a neuroscientist, like I work with so many type of people. And I think that we can kind of like limit ourselves to like, oh, I need to just be working with this one person, when we can just be working with an array of many people. But I'm hearing that it can also be both for you, like in terms of someone working with another OCD specialist.
Yeah, and for me, I don't know why I find it hard to put words to like my exact process. We kind of talked about this on our first call together, but I would say my intention to work with someone is to get underneath the the things that are popping up in their day to day and get to some of the core of why this is such a big fear of theirs to begin with. So I really try to go deeper into like, well, what are the fears that are driving you to either be scared to leave or scared to stay? Like there's something that is really scaring you. So I really try and focus on kind of an understanding of what those things could be. So people feel like, oh, I now understand why I'm reacting in this way. And then I try and help them with mostly body based, but also some cognitive tools as just a reminder of, hey, like when these anxious thoughts or feelings come up, you don't have to just let that kind of dictate the rest of your day or even the week. We've all had like a spiral that lasted like weeks on end, and if you can just learn how to kind of embrace it a little bit more, but also move through it at the same time. It's like a hard thing to explain, but knowing when to hold space for those feelings and thoughts and knowing when to just interrupt them and continue on, because it doesn't always serve us to just go into the thought and stay in there forever.
What I'm hearing from you as you're talking is like a very like a more grounded and not so scary approach. I think that a lot of people can see the term ROCD or OCD and feel really scared because there's just so much stigma behind it. And it can feel scary when someone's like, oh my God, I just got diagnosed with ROCD. Like, and a lot of people, like we talked about before, have this like image of, oh, I'm like the person cleaning, you know, or like so much stigma and shame behind it. And what I really like about the term relationship anxiety and the work that you're doing is it doesn't have to be so scary. You know, like it doesn't have to feel so threatening. It doesn't have to be this. And this is like a really big part of the work that we do too, is that it doesn't have to be you or define who you are. And I think that relationship anxiety in that term gives people more of a space of being human, and it gives more of a space of letting go of I am this and it's scary and I have to follow this like medical diagnosis of X, Y, and Z, where it's more like, hey, I see you and you know, I've been there and let's do this together in a way that doesn't have to feel so freaking scary. And that's definitely something that we strive to do with Awaken into Love too, where it's definitely that combination of RCD and anxiety together. But I think that that's such an important model. I don't know if you think that. I'm assuming you think that way because it feels like you work that way, but it doesn't have to feel so scary.
Yeah, and I think we put a lot of labels on everything, like not just the diagnosis, I'm putting that in air quotes, but even as like, what are your qualifications to help me, for example? Like that's a question that I've been asked before. And, I'll just be straight with people. Like there are, therapists that are great, and then there are therapists that are not so great. And we've all had experiences, or anyone in therapy I could think has had an experience where like maybe you didn't find the best therapist right away. I've had therapists be like, oh, that doesn't sound like you really care about this person, which is one of the worst things you could say to someone who's experienced ROCD or relationship anxiety. And so you can have an amazing therapist and a therapist who's never heard of this and then completely almost gaslight you in your experience, or you can have an incredible coach or someone who can really like resonate you, who's been in your shoes before. And then you can have a coach who's not so great. Like I'm sure there's many coaches out there who are not actually helping people. So I feel much more confident in the fact that I can relate on a personal level with my clients. And I know that some people don't feel that way. They'd rather have someone who has, the credentials, I guess you could say, of a therapist. And I'm not knocking therapists at all. I love therapists. I've been in therapy before many times, and I highly recommend people go to therapy. But those labels can also be a little bit sticky too, because if you're just going to therapy because of the label of the therapist, then are you actually checking to see if that's the best person to support you in your journey?
There's so much I can say to this. I think also like having been in the mental health field for such a long time, and I started therapy. My mom put me in therapy when I was like 10 because she was like, your father's an alcoholic and you need to go to therapy. So I started so young and like have seen like hundreds of therapists, and I can like literally attest to the fact that there are horrible therapists out there, and it is damaging and it is not okay. Like I'm sure you've heard some stories of clients coming to you and just having a horrible experience and you being like, what is going on? Like, how can a therapist even say that? And I think that this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that we are all empowered, sovereign individuals, and we get to choose, you know, what works for us and play around with it. And just because a therapist has said something to you that could have been really damaging, like I've heard stuff that is just unethical that not even a coach would ever say, you know.
Yep.
It really comes down to just knowing that every individual has their choice and their sovereignty. And if something is not empowering for you, you don't have to choose that route. And I think the whole
Exactly.
qualification thing, like you're saying, I think as a society, we're starting to move a little bit more away from it. I think people are less and less going to school, and people are starting to think, wow, there are coaches out there who can help me more than therapists. You know, I think that It's the same in the medical field. I'm seeing that a lot too, with people feeling like their naturopath can help them, or their doctor and stuff like that. But there is that reality, and I think it really comes down to, luckily, us knowing that we can be empowered and choose what works for us.
Totally. And, not to even, this isn't even to toot my own horn, but I've had many clients say that my help to them was way beyond a therapist who didn't know their experience. So just, thinking about talking to someone that's your friend, like if they can sit there and validate you and have compassion and empathy for you and say, oh my gosh, been there. Like, I know how hard that is, instead of saying, huh, like that doesn't seem familiar to me. Like that doesn't sound like you're in a happy relationship, the difference between those two things can be so huge. And so just really making sure that whatever coach or therapist or anything that you're doing to get support, it's just making sure that this person is validating you first and foremost, because even if your feelings are maybe, you know, too much, so much to speak, or if you're like, oh, I have too many feelings about this, I shouldn't be feeling this way, even if you think that, then someone should still validate you and say, nope, your feelings are valid, you're reacting this way because of something. And even if we choose to grow beyond that type of reaction, the way you're reacting is still valid, because the worst thing someone can say to you is like, that doesn't seem like you should be reacting that way, or you shouldn't be doing that.
I think another damaging thing within that some people don't realize is when someone, like a therapist or even like a coach, says that they are right versus the person is right, when they're like, no, this is actually the right way and you're doing the wrong way, in a way that is disempowering. Again, like I'm talking more about the person and, the therapist being like, feeling like they're so right about everything. I feel like we
Absolutely.
could do a whole podcast on like the things that, are said that are so hurtful for people who have relationship anxiety and ROCD. That really breaks my heart. It seems like you and I have both gone through it too. You've had experiences as well that have been really hurtful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. So for everyone out there, just as a reminder, know that you have that empowerment and sovereignty to choose what works for you, and, what feels good for you. And I think that the more we're getting into this work with the ROCD and relationship anxiety, the more I feel like things are just going to, blend in a way that's important. I think that there are things within the relationship anxiety spectrum that are important for ROCD work and vice versa. And I just have a feeling that what's important is us just all coming together to support the individual and what they need during that time and what works for them, and just empowering them in that way. And that's what I'm hoping in terms of the whole labeling with the ROCD and anxiety work.
Yes. And that's why I'm so happy that we get to have these types of conversations. And I know, many of us message with other coaches in our space, and we're all really just here to help others with their own anxiety or fears in the relationship. So, just, I guess, to your point, yeah, that collective greater good of supporting is more important than who you decide to work with, or, what label you give it. It's really just about you feeling confident to take steps that help support yourself.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here. This is so
Yes, this
much
was so
fun.
good.
This was
I
so
know, it was
great.
so good.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much. You're
Keely.
so welcome. If anyone wants to find you or they want to start to work with you, where's the best way? Where's the best place they can go?
Yeah, so I'm over on Instagram and TikTok at the same handle, You Love and You Learn. And then my blog is youloveandyoulearn.com. So on my website, I have over 75 blog posts that kind of share more about my story and relationship anxiety. And then that has more information about how to work with me as well, if someone would like to learn more.
Beautiful. So you're working with people one-on-one right now? Is that kind of the main focus that you're doing? You're working with people? Awesome.
Yeah, so one-on-one, and then I did come up with a digital course that kind of takes the one-on-one concepts and puts it into a self-study thing that you can learn kind of on your own terms. So I know that, for me, private coaching is like a 3-month thing. So I know that can be like a big investment as far as time and energy for somebody. So if you're looking for something a little bit more just kind of on the fly, then the
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It was so
thank
wonderful to
you.
have you, and thank you for the work that you do. It's so, so, so important. And I'm just so happy that we're continually spreading this information for people who need it. So thank you. It's such a blessing.
Yes, thank
Thank
you, and
you.
you too.
Thank you.